Hello, everyone. Welcome to WD Carousel Podcast. My name's Ian.
And I'm Crystal.
And we're going to talk about another ride, which we haven't done in a fairly long time now.
Yeah, it's been a minute. I think the last time we talked about a ride was the Jungle Cruise?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I think that's correct. Yeah.
So, I mean, the holidays were in there. There was a lot of stuff going on. We were trying to finish up the series that we'd been holding on to for a while.
Yeah.
And so there were a number of other things on our plate. But let's get back into talking about one of Disney World's most famous rides.
Yes.
Now, the last few, you might have noticed, we've been talking about Magic Kingdom rides.
Right.
And as we were discussing, we were like, well, do we want to keep on that theme or do we want to branch out a little bit?
Yeah, swap it up a little bit. And I think we thought that going over to Epcot, which is the next oldest park, would be kind of a fun little swap up. So we're going to talk about Spaceship Earth.
Yes.
Which is one of my favorites at Epcot. It's classic. It really harkens back to the old school Omnimover style. So it's be kind of fun to kind of go through it a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, Epcot itself gave reality to Disney's fantasy. And so it wasn't all just, make believe, make believe, make believe, make believe.
Right.
Really, the Imagineers team got together and decided that they wanted to showcase exactly what the world is, what humans can do, and make it a more fun, educational sort of thing.
Right. It's a positive look at the future and of the world as it is now, and kind of having that. Because, with Epcot, we've talked about this before, but it was the two different parks, the World Showcase and the Future World, that they put together, and having that available as like one kind of homogenous thing where you could see the future and what it can be, and then mix it up with, the countries and, celebrating the world, makes for a very kind of positive and interesting kind of a place to visit, which is why it's probably my favorite park.
And what really was the inspiration for Epcot, if you are not as familiar with Disney himself, was he loved World's Fairs. We've talked about Disney's love and appreciation for World's Fairs in a number of other episodes where we've even talked about it having influence in other rides and other achievements that he's had. And the Spaceship Earth building itself is inspired by World's Fair that happened in Montreal in 1967, and it really kind of set the bar, and that was the first ride event place building that the Imagineer team, when they decided they were going to actually bring the idea of Disney's Epcot into reality, that's where they started and where they focused.
Right.
So
and that was, in fact, so Montreal is what you were mentioning, and that was the entire concept of the geodesic dome idea. I mean, they saw that, and they're like, this is actually something that we want to build for real.
It's so neat and so modern and so...
Yeah, it was Buckminster Fuller was the...
Yes, I think so.
He was the pioneer of the geodesic domes in general, and would go and do lectures and show people kind of how neat these structures were and how efficient they could be built. And, so Disney, like, this is perfect. It's like the idea of the buildings of the future from the perspective of the 80s, and do that and build this kind of future that now is kind of dated a little bit. In sort of a retro, fun way.
I was going to say, is that futuristic retro?
Yes, it's
or
definitely
something like
definitely
that now?
Retro future.
But this also was the first time that they decided to take the concept of the geodesic dome into a full sphere.
Right.
This is the only standing by itself independent sphere. Using the geodesic design and everything.
Yeah, with the little triangles. And the thing that's interesting, too, is the whole thing is built in two layers. So you've got the inner layer, which is the actual ride structure, and it's the walls of the ride. And then they've got the more pretty, the stuff the golf ball look that you see on the outside, and that's this kind of outer permeable layer as kind of an extra guard against the elements, and it's the air gap for insulation and
easier to fix the interior building without having to go outside and have the image ruined of Disney, because we all know about how Disney doesn't want to spoil the magic or anything like that.
Exactly. So having that, and then on top of that, the other one was rain.
Yes.
The ability to have rain run through in the middle of the dome instead of having it going all the way through, so the whole sphere kind of goes through.
Yeah, instead of it sloughing off the sides. Now, what they do is there are holes in the corners of each of those triangles where the rain can get into, but unlike where you would expect it to roll to the bottom, unless it's really heavy rain, what it does is it collects out the sides and moves down one of the 3 legs that holds up Spaceship Earth, and it goes out to the World Showcase Lagoon.
Yes, and so you theoretically never see the rain. However, they do have, there's footage of it online too, where if there's any problem with
the backup system,
or
it's
you've
just
got
way
really
too heavy of a rain,
you will see it dropping right into the queue. So that does happen, but it's not as common.
And if you are familiar at all with Florida, it does rain almost every day, at least a little bit.
A little bit, yeah.
So it's kind of neat to have a place where logically you don't think you'd be safe from the rain, but you actually are.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the ride itself, if you are unfamiliar with the way the ride functions, it is an Omnimover, and it was one of a few very similar styles of Omnimover rides in Epcot at the time. So there was Horizons, and there was one more.
World of Motion.
World of Motion, which has since been replaced by Test Track, and then there was...
but I don't think... was Horizons an Omnimover?
It was.
I thought it was an individual car.
It was It was definitely an Omnimover build. It was very neat. It was a very unique Omnimover system. It was a little different than some of the others. Innovative ride. That's a whole separate thing. But it was an Omnimover as well.
Because I know that Universe of Energy has the big cars where it fit almost 100 people per.
Yes, and they would just...
Which was huge too. But when you're talking about the classic rides in Epcot, there are only a couple that still exist. The ones that were, early opening day attractions, ones that when you think back to classic Epcot, you're going to find, and the ones that still, I hate to say this, but follow the same ideas of education through enjoyment.
Right.
And the only other ones outside of Spaceship Earth are Journey into Imagination, Living with the Land, and then The Seas. But all of those 3 have been so heavily changed, manipulated, influenced, that really the only one that is the same would be Spaceship Earth.
Right. The rest of them have all been changed, modified in a way that they no longer they usually, so in the case of like the Seas, you get now it's been injected with a different Disney
with
IP.
Nemo and
Friends. So you have some Disney IP that's not.
And that was the big thing about Epcot, not to get on an Epcot rap, but Epcot didn't want to have any IP in there at all.
Right.
And so they had their own focuses in different areas, they made different characters and all of that. So it's weird to see IP coming into the park. I understand it, but it makes me sad that there's only, a few rides that still exist with the original creativity that this park was inspired by.
Yeah, it kind of sometimes it feels like you lose a little bit of the point of it a little bit. I mean, obviously they're all still great attractions and they have their own charm, but it definitely is cool that they have Spaceship Earth has kind of become the lone testament to the original idea of Epcot.
It's essentially the only one still with animatronics in it too, the classics.
Right.
So,
well, it's technically Journey into Imagination is.
But I think those figments are updates and different than the original figments.
Sure. They're a little bit more later generation of.
Yeah. And that's not to say that Spaceship Earth hasn't had updates either. The original animatronics were fairly simplistic. They'd used the hydraulic and
single motion. They do have one thing that they were designed to do, and that's all they did. They had no extra actuators.
And
for additional
in
movement.
each little vignette that you go through on this ride, because you'll end up basically going through little vignettes, spoiler, each one represents a different part of technology and communication, and that's what the ride is an exploration evolution of how communication has developed from the caveman age all the way up to modern.
Right.
And in each little vignette, there's always a couple characters, but one in particular that was the big one that did the bigger movements and the bigger gestures.
Right.
And those are the ones that when they did the most recent revamp in 2007, they definitely focused on and got the up-to-date animatronics.
Yeah. So the kind of a basic overview of the ride, when you start off, you basically, it just takes you up through the dome through the history of humankind. Just kind of in general, just technology, or they just kind of just history in general?
It's communication. That was the theme, because originally it was sponsored by Bell,
Bell Labs, that's
which I'm not sure for those people who are listening if they ever had a landline phone, but Bell was the one.
Yeah,
and then it was taken over by AT&T, and then most recently Siemens.
Yep, Siemens. Yep.
And then that stopped in 2017, late 2017. So right now it's sponsorless.
Which is not uncommon for some Epcot attractions these days. A lot of them are not running with sponsors.
But a lot of communication things, and that's what they focused on.
Right.
And so you go through the vignettes. The first one talks about, like, the caveman drawings and, telling stories around the fire.
Right.
It basically walks you through one section at a time, I believe. Now, I'm not going to tell you every single section because I can't remember them all.
Right, exactly.
This ride is 16 minutes long. There are point of view videos you can find on YouTube if you're really interested in riding the ride, and it doesn't matter which iteration. There have been 4 main changes to the ride, so you can go and pretty much find video about any of them. But I believe the next one is Egyptian, where they talk about the hieroglyphs.
Yep.
And it's really interesting because when they were coming up with the concept of what they were going to have inside, they worked alongside Ray Bradbury.
Okay.
And also with people from the Smithsonian Institute to make sure that they were having accurate information. So even the hieroglyphs that are on the wall in the back
are correct.
Were letters from the pharaoh.
Oh, fun.
So they were literally able to take this real communication and put it there. I don't know if it says just buy milk and put it there,
right.
but it's legit.
Yes,
so
it's the real thing. And so they basically, they walk you up through these old, you kind of progressively going through newer and newer civilization until you get to more modern electronic age and stuff. And those are the areas that Disney has been the hardest work trying to keep up to in a way that doesn't
They didn't
make it
do
look
the
dated.
carousel of progress where they just kind of stopped at the 90s and everybody just loves it.
Yeah, it's kind of like that one. That one's the kind of the cult classic, so they just kind of leave it alone. But this one, they do actually part of the idea.
Attempts.
It's part of the idea for Spaceship Earth is it always has a certain level of up to dateness. I mean, obviously they can only do it so often, but it is a goal for them is to have it set up in a way where when you get through to the end, it's somewhat relevant to you. It doesn't look like the 60s.
Yeah. Some of my favorite updates to the modern storyline, and when I say modern storyline, I'm talking once we get electrical communication in there, so not, you're not going to find a lot as far as like the Gutenberg press goes and the Romans and yada yada yada, but once you get to the point of where they're bringing radio into it, TV into it, communications into it, computers into it, the most recent updates that we've seen, they have a room that used to be a big communications board.
Yep.
And now what it is it has to do with the Apollo. The Apollo launch.
Yeah.
And it actually has the black mathematician, the female black mathematician from, if you've seen Hidden Figures, they have her represented in there too, which I think is amazing to show that it was a mathematician that was able to get us to that point.
Right. And she's present in the scene. And that's the thing too, is when you create something like this, and you present it as history, people remember that, and so you are kind of writing the history book a little bit when you do that, so you have to take it a lot of care when you do something like that.
Making sure it's not just a room full of white men, but they're actually giving credit to
a fair representation of everything. Yeah.
Of how important she was.
Right,
dang
and
it.
how it all actually went down. So it's, and in the past it wasn't quite as advanced, but or in terms of, how detailed they go with it. But as things have progressed, they've been doing more and more to try to showcase more and more of how it
Yeah,
went
I mean,
then.
they also have the vignette of, you don't know if it's Steve Jobs or whatever, but that's the guess, is he's in his garage building the first at-home computer, the smaller size at-home computer, so you see him working on it there.
Yep.
And it brings you past that, and you go all the way up to the top of the geodesic sphere, where you see an image of the globe, and it talks to you about the Earth and all this other stuff and where we're going in the future. And at that point in time, your car turns around and you go down this big hill. One thing I found out, though, is in the beginning of this ride, when it first started, they actually had someone up there manually turning all the cars
Oh, really?
to make sure that they went backwards.
Oh.
That way you don't go down this big hill, because it's a pretty dang steep hill.
Yeah, it is.
Face first.
Oh, so they were not confident at first that it was gonna for sure go.
Well, I don't think they had figured out all the kinks yet.
Okay.
So they had someone manually up there and
Just
turning
making
your
sure
car
all got
and locking it and making sure it was in place.
Oh, funny.
So that way you wouldn't have an issue going down.
Yeah.
My least favorite update, though, was on the downhill. Instead of what they used to have, which were more communications vignettes on the side, they actually used to have the animatronics and those show scenes and
I see.
everything. They just have glass walls with lights on them, so it blinks and looks very deep and long, but it's
Right,
boring as heck. So what instead they have is a little touch screen on each car head behind where you're sitting, and you can go ahead and do a little story there. Now, you brought up the connection to that.
Yeah, for Horizons, they that was actually really on. This is like the Horizon took a while to open. It didn't open with the park, but so it was early '90s, and they put a touchscreen in the cars, and they had kind of a select your own adventure situation set up for it, and they've kind of carried it over a little bit and just kind of did a little wink in Spaceship Earth for
Even
it.
some of the same scenes, though.
Yes,
So you'll end
yes.
up in space, or
Yes.
you will be in the ocean, or those sorts of things too.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's a nice, tip your hat to Horizons,
Right.
which is one of the rides that is no longer with us, but it was a
Very well liked.
cult classic.
Yes.
Everybody loved it.
Yes.
And then you get to have your little story told off of the picture that they took of
Yep,
you in
yeah,
the
of
beginning,
course.
horribly edited and cut.
awful.
So
Yeah.
it's just,
It's like a jib jab thing from the early 2000s. But yeah, so it's a cool ride that way, and it is a cool update. I do like that update, having the kind of the choose your own adventure at the end. If you're gonna do that, do it in the way that kind of is representative of things that have happened before in the park, because that's the kind of ride that it is. It's so part of the fabric of the original Epcot that is kind of cool. They're kind of pushing some of that stuff back into it again. But yeah, so that's a pretty fun aspect of it.
some neat little facts about Spaceship Earth. I mean, you've been getting a few of them as we've been talking, but there have been 4, like I had mentioned, big changes to Spaceship Earth, and they include 4 different narrators. One of them I'm not really familiar with at all, but I do have it written down here. Lawrence Dobkin. I guess he was in, Star Trek and
okay.
the 10 Commandments.
Gotcha.
Which tells you how long ago
that was. Yeah.
And then they switched it over to Walter Cronkite.
Walter Cronkite, yeah.
Who went ahead and every time they did this, they rewrote the entire story for Spaceship Earth too.
Right.
Entire music change, everything.
Yeah.
And then everybody's favorite took over, and so we have Jeremy Irons. I
remember hearing his
Scar.
And it's interesting because it's kind of known. Like, a lot of rides have voiceovers in them, but for whatever reason, Spaceship Earth specifically they always get just a super heavy hitter, which is always kind of fun when they do the updates. Like, who's it gonna be?
And currently it is Dame Judi Dench.
Indeed.
Which I love that they are letting a woman speak to this now too.
Right, I
instead of
suppose it's been just dudes the whole time.
Well,
So.
and a lot of, I hate to say it, animatronics in there are going to be a lot of guys.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of the animatronics, you might see some familiar faces in there.
Yeah, we talked about that once before.
We
didn't
did.
we? Yeah.
We talked about how difficult it can be when you are building an animatronic and going through and carving out a face and then just reusing them in different areas. And you are going to find a lot of reuses of molds in this ride from the Hall of Presidents. Yeah. So presidents that look like presidents in the actual ride for the presidents look completely different here. And you're like, how did they do that?
Yeah. They're able, and it makes sense in the end. They just do a different skinning, they do different stuff, but you get like a lot of structures of like presidents in the Hall of Presidents, which I never really think about it. There's so many animatronics in Spaceship Earth that it's like we have to flesh this out.
It's over 100. I know that much.
Yeah, that's
I think
so
at one
crazy.
point in time, one of the websites I was researching on said 160 plus 2 horses.
Plus 2 horses.
Plus 2 horses.
Yep. There you go.
One thing that I thought was kind of funny was in one of the updates that they did when they were doing the newsy area, and they were they had this little newsboy in the first couple iterations where he was facing you and he was trying to hand you the paper, and then and this is just rumor now, it's rumor, but through one of the redos that they did, they broke his face.
Oh no.
But they still have him working. So the last time we went, he's actually on the other side facing away from us, but you still see him trying to hand out a paper as if, because we get the general gist anyways. We see the paper there. He's just talking to a black wall at this point in time instead of us. But that way they could still use the animatronic without having to spend all the money to fix his face.
So you only see the not broken part of the face?
No, you don't even really see the face. You see his hair and his hat and his
that's
clothes
funny.
And his arm with the paper.
It's sort of horrifying that there's like a broken face over there they just haven't fixed.
Now, just like anywhere, there's always going to be hidden Mickeys.
Oh, yes.
There's a number of them in there. Keep an eye out. They're all over the place. One website said there's over 5. Well, yes, there's over 5. Goodness gracious. At this point in time, with how many iterations that we've done, I'm sure they have more than 5 in there.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Oh,
I can't think of really anything else off the top of my head.
Oh, we did want to mention that there was you had something else?
The Ugly Edition.
Yes. So throughout the time of Spaceship Earth's life, it has been the tallest ride in the entire all of the parks, of Disney World. And the first time was when it was first built. Then it was surpassed in the early 90s by Tower of Terror. And then it was the tallest again.
Epcot went, no, we're not going to let you have that.
So for the year 2000, they added the horrifying magic wand thingy.
Mickey's hand with the magic wand that said 2000.
Yeah, and
then it got rid of the 2000 once we were past 2000 and just said
left the
Epcot.
wand. And that made it, I think it was over 200 feet.
250 feet.
So it was the tallest in the park up until that point, and then they finally removed all that, and it became the second again, and then the tallest was Everest, and then just six inches below that was the Tower of Terror again.
Yeah.
So they finally removed it. But yeah, there was a period of time there that whole monstrosity on top of the thing
was the largest thing on property.
Yeah.
But it is one of the most iconic rides or buildings associated with an amusement park outside of the actual
castles.
Disney castle.
Yeah.
You're going to not find another park that has something where you look at it and everybody's like, oh, that's the golf ball.
Definitely that thing from Epcot, So
that's Disney.
Yeah, and something to point out, just because we were going to touch on this just a little bit. There are some parts where people have complained about accuracy.
Oh, yeah.
And it's one of those things where some of the stuff is pretty small. It's kind of asinine, like it's not a big...
One of the things that you're going to hear the most about is they even have a photo spot for it where there's a little sign that says, if you can read this, thank the Phoenicians. But since the ride was created, more research has been found, and other places have come to light saying that they might have been the first ones with the written word and creating an alphabet and yada, yada, yada. And there are other places inside the ride that might not be as accurate
as others. And it's just one of those things where it is in the end a entertainment thing. It is where they try to make it historically accurate, but it is something that you have to take with a grain of salt. It is an amusement park ride, and it isn't going to be perfect.
I mean, at this point in time, it's over 35 years old, 40 years old almost, coming up here eventually. And I remember even back in school, I was still working off of a history book that said Christopher Columbus discovered America.
Right.
And the ride is older than me. Not by much, but it is. So their information back then is different than what we have now.
Yeah, the general consensus was different at the time. So it's in the end, it's that, it's the history of the ride and how the ride flows versus what's technically accurate. You kind of just have to give it to it a little bit.
I mean, unless you are a history major or a communications major, you're not going to notice those subtle nuances.
Yeah.
But you will learn and enjoy and just have fun with this ride.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my favorites for sure. So
we make sure that we go every time that we're there.
Exactly. It's very cool.
It's not like it changes much, but it's one of those necessities.
Exactly. It's just one of the ones you do, for me, it's like Jungle Cruise and Pirates and all those. It's just, I gotta do it. It's part of the
It's one
deal.
of our must-dos.
Yep. Very cool.
I think didn't we say it was our top ride in the Battle of the Rides for Epcot?
Epcot, yeah, it was up there with...
Because it embodied Epcot.
It did, and I think that it was in the final round with the other two.
Haunted Mansion.
And there was one more. It was like, oh gosh.
I don't know. If you're curious, go check out the video on the recordings.
Teens there of our stuff. But yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it's one of my favorite rides, and I'm glad we got to kind of touch base on it.
Yeah, there's even more stuff about it. So if you're interested and love nerding out about the history of rides, especially how they're put together, there are things inside of there that they built but never were utilized, so they're still just sitting there dormant in the dark that you won't even notice.
Right.
Unless you know it's there.
And maybe one day I'll do some research on some of those really weird little things, because I love that stuff. Oh, that could be a
fun episode.
Yeah, and I might do it either based on a ride or a park. I haven't decided yet, but it'd be kind of a
That'd
fun.
That'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah, a fun one to do. So maybe one day when I'm
in the future.
Yeah, when I'm not all over the place, I'll be able to get one down and we can look at that a little bit. So very cool. All right, well, thank you so much for listening and watching. This has been WD Carousel Podcast. My name's Ian.
And I'm Crystal. And I hope you guys have a great, big, beautiful tomorrow.
Beautiful tomorrow, just a dream away.